All right, so chapter one also gives us an opportunity to look at some of the building blocks of every modern economy. And when we get through this PowerPoint, you'll be like, yeah, well, that sounds kind of logical. It sounds really like it's almost like a no-brainer in the sense that what I'm going to talk about, you look at it and go, yeah, you got it. You have to have this to make an economy run. But it's the way in which the economies blend these various categories that create the differences between a country that is mostly agricultural or a country that is really into high tech and finance and computers, a country that manufactures or a country that does services. So it's the way you blend all this together that gets you to where you are in the economy. Now, there's a graphic representation, which is um, the um, the production possibilities curve. So here we are with the factors of production. And the factors of production, move that up there. And again, these are the essential building blocks of an economy. And this is, again, stuff that is covered in chapter one of our textbook. All right, so the first is basic kind of land resources, or just kind of simply put, land. It means any natural resources. So when we look at the natural resources, we're looking at things that are food crops, things that are cash crops like cotton or tobacco. You could do fish and water, which are not land resources, but they are natural resources. Obviously, countries that have good coastlines and good fishing grounds can exploit that, as well as water resources, which, the Budweiser brewery in Newark needs a clean water source. If you think about that for a second, or Coca-Cola bottling, lots of cans of Coke. Mineral resources, as well as oil and natural gas resources. Again, minerals, copper, the biggest thing on the market right now because of its use in industrial applications with heating and cooling. Is the most sought after in production mineral. Obviously, gold and platinum and those kind of things are important for their own sake. Natural gas and oil is a 20th century really a good exploit, although oil was discovered or drilled deliberately in 1859 in northwestern Pennsylvania. I've driven through that area. But natural resources, some countries are blessed with it. It's just the way it is. I mean, you think about Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia and oil, it's like sticking a pin into a water balloon. I mean, you're just sitting on a couple of really good natural oil fields. Other countries have great natural gas fields. The United States has discovered that with regard to using the hydraulic fracturing to get into the shale formations. That's why we are now the one, top two, top three with Russia and Saudi Arabia, oil producing countries in the world, 12 million barrels a day before the COVID collapse. So land resources, one category. All right, human resources. Again, this kind of is like a no-brainer. Human resources are important. We know that. First, unskilled labor, and this goes back to the Industrial Revolution, really, when we needed just people to do a function, to do a process, to sit there and pull a lever, or put the raw materials in and watch the machine do the work. So unskilled labor is one thing, as well as then skilled labor, the technical people who can build the machinery, repair the machinery. Those are the skilled people, artisans that can build, that can build a building. Stonemasons, things like that. It goes back to medieval times. But in around 1900, there was I think around 1903, maybe, Frederick Taylor writes a book called The Organization Man. And what he does is lay out something that becomes more and more critical as we move forward into the 20th century. And Henry Ford is probably the first example of it. And that is the idea of a managerial cast of people here, a planner, somebody who sees the big picture. Okay, this person may be a decent enough frontline worker, can put together things and assemble things, but the idea of seeing that kind of snaking line of an assembly line and employing it on such a scale, that was the kind of genius that Frederick Taylor in his book Organization was looking for, the people who can think through the big picture. All right, so if you're any kind of manager in any kind of business setting, you have to be able to look at the big picture and see it for what it is. You can't just be so focused on one aspect of your business. You have to be able to see the whole flow. Good managers can do that. Now, again, you have to develop them. Sometimes you develop them in academic settings like colleges. Sometimes it takes people who work in the field. I mean, when I was a fast food manager, and this goes back to the 1980s, I was a Burger King and Taco Bell manager, most of the managers there were not business people. They were people who got their degree. I mean, I worked with one who was a journalism major. I worked with another one who was an English lit major. But because there were no jobs for journalism majors or English lit majors, they needed to work. And so they worked and just had a knack for picking these things up. Some people had worked their way through the system. One of the people who still works for the Burger King franchisee that I worked for in 1981, I run into him every once in a while when I'm back in Pennsylvania, in my hometown area where I grew up. He started off as just a college kid who was working at the time. Then he became a kind of summer vacation fill-in manager, and then he worked his way up to district manager and regional manager, and here we are almost 40 years later. And he's one of the corporate kind of execs there that oversees a very large Burger King franchisee that has like 50 stores in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area. So it's important to have human resources. Now, again, this is not just throwing bodies at people. You have to be able to pick and choose the right people. Obviously, if you have a lot of heavy duty work, you're going to need people who can shoulder that burden. If it is a task that requires intellectual capacity, then you're going to need to have an educated workforce to do it. So, we're not just plugging one set of people in and hoping that they can work in all these settings. They can't. All right, number 3, capital resources. All right, capital resources. Capital goods or capital resources. Money here to fund business operations, but money itself doesn't matter. Okay, we talk about capital, and Karl Marx wrote the book Das Kapital. It's not just talking about the accumulation of money, but that money has to be employed. That money has to go somewhere. It has to go to places that can effectively use it. So when we look at it, it talks about like using money that's pooled to buy or to be loaned out so that you can buy large pieces of equipment, machinery, technology. Those are capital resources or capital goods. Very important. But you think about England, for example. Why is England kind of set up right now with that in that early industrial age? Number one, they had resources. They had resources that they could exploit from the colonies, such as North America. They had the trade routes, obviously the capital equipment, which were the trading ships at the time. They had people willing to finance it, to roll the money that they were making in this kind of British East India Company trading mentality back into businesses, back into banks, so that it could be lent out again. And they had labor. I mean, they had people who were moved from the farms to the big cities, and that was their pool of labor to do there. So, they had everything. Now, the book. Now, if I was just doing regular economics, this would be where I would stop. If I do IBP, I would stop here also when I was teaching the International Business and Politics class. But with this AP now, we have a 4th category here. And the 4th category is entrepreneurial ability. That is, you have to have a system in place, a legal system in the sense that you have to encourage people to take the initiative. You have to encourage them to take risks. You have to encourage people to make decisions on their own. And there are people who do that. There are people who fail lots of times. I mean, Edison jokingly claimed that he learned 2,000 ways not to make a light bulb before he figured out how to make a light bulb. And even in his battle with electricity, his DC current got run over by AC current. And Tesla and Westinghouse were over there, and Edison was over here on the other side with the DC current, and he lost. And but still, the idea is I pick myself up, I go boom. And these are the success stories. I mean, after I worked as a fast food manager, I worked in a video store rental chain. This is before Blockbuster became a big thing. And this company was founded by a Turkish immigrant who came to this country in 1960 with $30 in his pocket and a knack for fixing radios. And he established a business. And that's like the American success story, right? To come from another country here and be able to create an empire that he later sold to Blockbuster for $200 million. And then he got bored and he went back in and he started his own internet service provider company. But the idea of having people try things out, they may fail. I mean, most small businesses fail within a year. But those that survive. And those people who fail don't necessarily go jumping off a bridge somewhere. They dust themselves off, they figure it out, and they go forward. And maybe they come back with a slightly different version of what they had, or they do something completely different. Who knows? But it's the entrepreneurial ability that distinguishes countries that innovate versus countries that imitate. China, for all its economic power, is an imitator. Okay, more patents, for example, are designed and executed every year in South Korea with a much smaller population than communist China. Okay, communist China works, they build stuff, they make stuff, they make money, but they're not innovators. Okay, they're not innovators. Now they're learning. You know, there are certain people who are pushing the envelopes in certain things. I mean, you know, they're beginning to develop their own kind of drug pharmaceutical industries there, not just simply imitating or taking American patents and making them there. But you need that. You need a class of people who don't have any shackles or bondage to an old system of feudalism or, you know, mercantilism. That these people are free to create and free to produce and free to exploit their ideas. I mean, you know, the success stories are there. J.K. Rowling's living in a car. She's homeless, and then she writes this thing called Harry Potter. You know, the ability to create is what distinguishes democratic capitalist societies versus, you know, communist societies or tight-fisted fascist societies where the government, you know, steals everything. Kleptocracies, as they call them. Okay, so those are the four kind of building blocks here, but when we look at that, we have the combinations. So now you're looking at combinations of things, and when you have an industry like hotels and tourism, you think about it. You know, if your country is a Caribbean island, you're not going to worry about manufacturing as much. So what you're going to do is exploit the land resources that you have, which are beachfront properties. You're going to need a limited amount of materials to build the hotels and the infrastructure there. But most of your emphasis has to be on a workforce that is good at what they do, that can make that experience for that traveler, that vacationer, wonderful. So they come back, they recommend it to their friends. So you look at it and you need think about all the people who work in a hotel, chambermaids, cooks, busboys, dishwashers, groundskeepers, front desk people, you know, all the things that go into a hotel and a resort complex. The people who take care of the pools, people who are the bartenders, you know, everything that goes into it. That's a labor-intensive business. Hospitality, restaurant service, like labor-intensive. All right, so if you're a heavy manufacturing company, obviously capital goods, factories, technology, machinery, and raw materials. You have a big labor force too, but it's maybe a little more spread out. It's a little more balanced. You need a good labor force, you need a good amount of technology, and you need, obviously, the raw materials. If you're in a financial services business, if you're managing information, you need some technical stuff. Obviously, computers help you, but you don't necessarily need a lot of land resources. You need office space, and you need quality people to work for you. So again, mix it up and create different combinations, and that's what you get when you have these factors of production. Okay, these building blocks, essential building blocks of an economy. FAQ page is there for any questions. Okay, on to the next.